Good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, I'd like to start by expressing our deepest sympathies to the person that's lost their life this morning as a result of this aviation incident. We're also very relieved there was nobody else that was seriously injured as a result of the incident. So the police are investigating a fatal aviation incident in Cairns City this morning on the 12th of August. Emergency services were called to the intersection of the Esplanade and Florence Street around 1:50 a.m. this morning, following reports a helicopter had collided with the roof of the building, a multi-level hotel. The resulting impact caused a fire on top of that hotel. So the police have invoked its authorities under the Public Safety Preservation Act, firstly to ensure the safety of the people that were involved, or that were residing within the building, and also the neighbouring premises, and also for emergency services to safely and effectively carry out their operational activities this morning. An exclusion zone remains in place, and that encompasses the Esplanade along here, Minnie Street, Abbott Street and Florence Street. The building has been evacuated as a precaution, and there were no injuries sustained by people on the ground. The pilot and single occupant of the aircraft was located, declared deceased at the scene. Our forensic examinations are being conducted at the moment, and that will assist with the formal identification of the person involved. The Queensland Police Forensic Crash Unit will work alongside the Australian Transport Safety Bureau to investigate this incident and prepare a report to the coroner. Our investigations will be ongoing. There is no further threat to the community, and we believe this is an isolated incident. I'd also like to thank the other emergency services who continue to work with us here today and into the future, and the public for their cooperation here today. Thank you.
Angus Mitchell, Chief Commissioner of the Australian Transport Safety Bureau. Look, following on from what you've just heard from the police there, firstly I would like to thank the other emergency services, both the police and Fire and Rescue, who have been on scene since the early hours this morning when this happened. Equally, I do want to acknowledge that this is obviously a traumatic incident. There's been an impact to a building here. We've certainly just had a look at the room that was impacted, where we had 2 people asleep at the time. And no doubt that's been a very traumatic experience for them, and also to the family and friends of the person who has deceased in this incident. Our job is now to have a look at the facts as we can gather over the next couple of days to establish the sequence of events. The ATSB is primarily interested in transport safety, so we will have to make a determination in the coming days based on the evidence, both the evidence that police gather and what we can gather from the scene, as to whether this was a transport safety event or something different. I know there's already been some reporting in the media around this flight may have been unauthorised and unscheduled. If that's the case, this may well also be a regulatory and police matter, more so than an ATSB matter. But at this stage, we'll treat the investigation like we do any other. We'll certainly gather what we can from the scene, from the operator, and once we do have an identity of the personnel involved, then we'll start looking a little bit more closely on all the things that may have contributed to what unfolded last night. But as I said, it's only very early days. I have a team that have come up from the Brisbane and from Canberra this morning, and we'll spend the next day or so gathering what we can to understand what happened from the time of takeoff, from what we understand was Cairns Airport, to the time that it impacted the building in the early hours this morning. We know that visibility was down at the time, that there was possible rain. We want to understand what the helicopter was equipped with, but also potentially what the helicopter was doing at the time and any nature of the flight. And that's going to be the focus of our investigation. After that time, we'll be looking to release a preliminary report, and that could be as early as a couple of weeks' time once we get a sequence of events understood far better. I'll now hand over to the fireys to make comment.
Afternoon, everyone. Superintendent Greg Tomlinson, Zone Commander for Cairns North. Like the other emergency services, we received notification of this incident around 10 minutes to 2 o'clock this morning, with a possibility of an aircraft impacting one of the high-rise buildings here on the Esplanade. On arrival, our crews found an incident occurring on the roof. They made their way to that roof area where there was a fuselage and a small running fuel fire located on the roof. Crews extinguished that fire and then proceeded to check for any further fire extension throughout the building itself. They assisted in the evacuation of the residents from the top levels, and I do like to take the opportunity to recognise the wonderful work that was done by the staff within the building to ensure the evacuation of all those residents to get outside and be safe at the end of the incident. Thank you.
Could we just, get you to come forward? Yep.
We understand that there was two holiday makers at the hotel that received minor injuries as a result of the impact of the aircraft on the building. They were taken to hospital as a precautionary matter, but it's my understanding they are doing okay.
So just confirming, the helicopter took off from the airport, not from the helipad across the Esplanade there?
Investigations are still ongoing, but we believe it has taken off from a general aviation hangar at Cairns Airport earlier this morning.
Do you believe the pilot was trying to land on the roof of the hotel?
I don't know that at this stage. Look, every line of inquiry will actually be investigated, and working with our partner agencies will determine actually what happened there.
How did he gain access to the helicopter?
That's another matter that's currently being investigated by our detectives.
But just to confirm, it was stolen. That's how police are treating it.
No, the aircraft was moved from a general aviation hangar early this morning, and it was an unauthorised flight. We again are working with the local aviation operators to determine the circumstances leading up to before the aircraft went into the air, to give us a better understanding.
Was the pilot an employee?
Not sure at this stage.
Was he believed to be affected by drugs or alcohol?
That's unknown at this stage.
Do we know how long he was in the air before the incident occurred?
The early parts of the investigation established it wasn't in the air a great deal of time.
Do we know if it was being flown at speed? There's some reports that there was.
I couldn't answer that question. I don't know the capabilities of those aircraft.
And do you know the type of aircraft?
I know that it was a small helo, seats up to 4 people, but the specifics of the actual aircraft itself, no.
Have police been able to at least do a preliminary ID on that pilot?
Our forensic crash unit is obviously at scene at the moment. As part of that, we're examining the scene, and the person that was in that aircraft at the time forms part of that investigation and examination.
Can you confirm he had a pilot's licence and was licensed to fly this
I don't
aircraft?
know that at this stage.
Have you interviewed anyone who was staying at the hotel, and were any of those people a group of pilots?
I'm unaware of that. The people that have been interviewed by our detectives will continue throughout the day until we collect that information to support us with the investigation.
Have you spoken to the pilot's family or anyone connected with him?
Investigations are being conducted at this stage to formally identify the person, and that would be the next step.
Is there any indication in the early stages of the investigation that there was a breach of security at General Aviation last night?
I'm unaware of that at this stage, but again, our investigations will hopefully ascertain that.
Have you contacted next of kin for the pilot?
I'm not quite sure where that is at the moment, but all of our efforts will go into identifying who the deceased person is, and that allows us then to speak with their next of kin.
So just to be clear, you have no idea who this person is at the moment, or you've got a preliminary?
We've got some preliminary information, but again, there's no confirmation of identity.
Was he a Farnworth, Queensland local?
I don't know.
And what information from the public are you seeking?
Look, if there was anybody that was on the foreshore area in the early hours of this morning that actually saw the incident occur, we would invite them to contact Crime Stoppers or the local police and provide their details so our detectives could investigate them. Again, if there was anybody that had any footage whatsoever, we would rely on that to support us in our investigation.
What
It's
information has
pictures.
Nautilus Aviation been able to give you?
Beg your pardon?
What information has Nautilus Aviation been able to give you so far?
Again, we are working with a local aviation operator to ascertain the circumstances that led to that aircraft becoming airborne, just to understand what those contributing factors might have been for this incident to occur here early this morning.
Based on your initial assessment of the scene, is this looking like a deliberate act or just an accident?
Unknown at this stage. Look, we'll investigate all lines of inquiry, but again, I really want to reinforce to the public we believe that this is an isolated incident and we don't believe there's any further threat posed.
Do you have any idea at all as to the intent of what was happening?
No, again, look, it's early days. If you can appreciate, our investigators have been on scene since the early hours of this morning. They're interviewing a number of people. They'll put together the information that they collect, and then obviously that will give us some sort of view as to what's occurred.
How many? So there were about 400 people in the hotel, were there?
Not quite sure the exact number, but yeah, look, unfortunately, the evacuation of the building required them to be moved to another location, a safer location. But I do understand that we've supported a number of people this morning that had ongoing transport arrangements to collect their belongings so that they could try and meet those arrangements.
Given the number of people in the hotel, it is peak tourist season. Are you surprised more people weren't injured?
Look, I think it's just by pure luck that no one else was injured, and we're so grateful that there has been no other injuries as a result of this incident. It could have been much worse.
You mentioned minor injuries for the two hotel guests. Can you talk us through exactly what they were?
I'm not quite sure. I do believe that they were asleep at the time, and there were some windows that may have been impacted as a result of the incident occurring, but I'm not quite sure the extent of their injuries, but I am advised that they are okay.
Confirm that the helicopter is still on the roof. Do you know when that's going to be?
Yeah, the scene is still being examined up there on the roof.
What's the structural integrity of the building at the moment?
Yeah, good question. That's something that we've got to work through before we actually allow the building to actually be reoccupied. We've got to make sure that the structural integrity is sound, and we'll work with local engineers to make sure that occurs.
And how long is the wreckage of the helicopter likely to remain in place?
Look, the forensic examination will continue throughout the day. We're hoping that there'll be further updates during the day, and then if we can make the scene better by removing that aircraft, it'll allow the operators of the accommodation facility here to get their guests back into their rooms.
What was it like for the paramedics and police when they got to the scene for them personally this morning?
Yeah, look, it was an unfolding incident that you generally don't come across every day. So I think that the fact that we work together well as emergency service agencies, particularly here in Cairns, that our response and our efforts that went into making the scene safe and making sure nobody else was injured, and to conduct the investigation, I think was really important.
Obviously, some of the blades of the helicopter rendered out here. Do we know exactly the path that was taken? Did it crash into the trees?
I understand the point of impact was on the northern side of the building.
Will you be looking into whether the pilot had been at the hotel before the flight?
Yeah,
do
look,
you know that information?
Look, certainly that will be a key feature of our investigation, the movements of the person that was involved, just to understand what actually happened, what were the contributing factors that led to this incident occurring.
Was there a party at the hotel the night before that he may have attended?
I couldn't answer that. No.
Can you confirm that it was a male?
Our identification process hasn't been completed at this stage.
That's an ATSB.
Thank you.
Can you talk about the Esplanade and whether there is any rhyme or reason why a helicopter would be permitted to fly here for non-emergency purposes?
Well, I think that's one of the things that we'll try and ascertain in over the coming days around whether it was indeed an unauthorised and unplanned flight as being recorded or otherwise. So we're still going through all the facts. What we do need to ascertain is the flight plan that was taken from when the helicopter took off. We understand it wasn't an extensive time in the air, but exactly where that flight plan or where that helicopter went is something that we'll look to ascertain with both recording devices that we may find on the helicopter and we may be able to take back to our labs in Canberra, but equally, as you've just heard, through any of the CCTV that may be captured along the Esplanade and any eyewitnesses that can come forward and report that what they've seen during the course of that flight.
What is an unauthorised flight?
Well, I think that comes down to as to whether it was a scheduled flight that had a flight plan or otherwise, and at this stage it's too early for us to ascertain, but certainly the reporting that we've got at the moment is that that may have been the case.
Was the ATSB, grounded any other helicopters from Northern Aviation?
No, that's not a role for the ATSB. We're here to understand what happened over that time that the helicopter was in the air, but also we'll have a look more broadly at around the circumstances that were behind this particular incident. The sequence of events, as you can imagine, when the helicopter crashes into a building, there's a lot of forces involved. You've also got the post-impact fire, which was extensive, as you would have seen from a lot of the media reports earlier this morning, as well as the firefighting effort. So it is quite a job for my team to now decipher from what's left in the wreckage there to try and understand exactly what was in place at the time and what does it mean.
How long was the helicopter in the air for?
Well, that's still part of the investigation yet, so we'll work with the police over what they know about and what they've managed to get from the evidence from the hangar and from this morning and at the time of impact. So at this stage, we're still not too sure.
And is the company cooperating with authorities?
From all the indication, we work quite closely with operators involved, and so that's something we'll be doing over the course of the day the next day or two, also with other services such as police.
Would you be able to fly this thing and get it up there if you didn't know what you were doing and didn't have a licence?
It's certainly very difficult to fly a helicopter if you're not a pilot or you're not experienced. So we don't know until the identity of the individual has been confirmed. We don't know the experience level, but it is certainly a very difficult thing to do if you haven't got experience of flying a helicopter.
And we've heard the Esplanade described as a no-fly zone. Can you explain what that means?
Well, I think that's probably more a regulatory question than an ATSB question. There are certainly regulations in place of where helicopters can fly and at the heights they can fly and the sort of instrumentation that would need to be under certain conditions, particularly night flying, but they're all parts of what we'll need to uncover over the course of the next day or two.
How many ATSB staff are on the ground here today?
We've got 4 of our staff here today. And we also will have staff that compile other parts of information from other places, whether it be from Canberra or from Brisbane, as necessary.
And any indication of when that helicopter will be retrieved off the rooftop?
We certainly try to work very quickly on sites like this. We're mindful that that is an operating business there, but that'll be between the police and ourselves to release the helicopter, and then, as you've just heard, around any other structural considerations that may need to be taken into account before that site's safe to be used again.
Do we know what time the helicopter took off from General Aviation Precinct?
Not confirmed at this stage, no.
And you don't know what speed it was travelling at when it come?
Not at this stage, no.
What does it take to get the helicopter off the roof in terms of numbers of people, equipment?
As you can appreciate, the helicopter has been substantially damaged, not only from the impact but also from the post-impact fire. So it's not an easy job, but that's something that will obviously be worked out over the course of the next few hours.
Is it likely to be a crane that retrieves it, or what sort of?
I think that's probably more likely to happen just because of the nature of the weight up there. But that's something that will be done by others over the course of the next couple of hours.
And when you said the preliminary report will be released, is that like a matter of days, within a week?
We will try and get out a preliminary report generally within the first 4 to 6 weeks, but that just depends on the nature of the incident in terms of what we ascertain over the next day or two.
And will you conduct interviews together with police, or do you do that separately?
We generally do ours separately. Police, that's just the nature of the way that our legislation works. But again, we need to understand a little bit more around the nature of the flight and the individual involved before we actually can give any timelines.
We might have a question for
Thank you.
paramedics, if we may. Thanks. Are you able to talk us through the people that you treated and what for?
Yes, in the end we had 3 patients. One of them was obviously the pilot, who unfortunately was deceased, and then we transported 2 patients to hospital who were not physically injured but were transported for further care and for their welfare after being involved in such a traumatic incident.
Are they still in hospital?
I believe they're still in hospital under care, yes.
What were some of the injuries, or what was that condition when they first arrived?
They were just distressed from the incident. It was obviously not something they were expecting to happen, so it was distressing for them. They were very lucky to have not been injured, but yeah, emotional distress.
Just to confirm, it was a 76-year-old woman and an 83-year-old man?
That's correct, yes.
Do you know where they were from?
No, I'm not sure where they were from, so...
Thank you.
How many crew did you have during this incident?
We had crews responding from Cairns Fire Station, Cairns South, as well as Smithfield was on its way down as well.
And how long did it take to get the fire under control?
Once the crews got to the roof area, probably within 10-15 minutes, they had the fire under control. As I said earlier on, there was two seats of fire, one being the fuselage, and then the fuel that was actually running across the roof was a secondary fire that crews managed.
Can you just talk to the complexity of fighting that type of fire on top of a rooftop, as well as with aviation fuel involved?
Okay, one of the difficulties is obviously getting access, so the crews made their way to the floor below. From there they've hooked in their hose lines to the internal fire safety systems and gone upstairs and fought the fires up there. The secondary part of that is to then check for fire extension, given the impact on the northern side of the building, was to ensure that the fire was contained to just the roof area and it hadn't actually spread to any of the lower levels. Once the crews were happy that there was no fire extension, they proceeded to then just help with the evacuation and make the scene safe.
We've seen some images of some of the debris on fire at the lower floors. Was that still in action when the actual fires arrived? Or?
I can't comment on what was actually seen other than what the crews have reported, and that was up on the roof.